Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Happy iOS Tuesday. I am so excited to be here with you tonight. Last Tuesday, I was not able to be here because I felt a little under the weather. It seems like everybody has like some sort of head cold nowadays, especially here in Colorado when the seasons are changing. But I'm here with you tonight. If you're new to my platform, if you're new to my live streams, my name is Eugene. I'm an iOS developer, and I talk about iOS development. And on every Tuesday, I host iOS Tuesday. Every Tuesday, I host iOS Tuesday. iOS Tuesday is a place where we talk about iOS development and where we talk about everything related to iOS. And last time I hosted iOS Tuesday, uh, last time I hosted iOS Tuesday, we talk about different interview questions for iOS developers. And last time I barely scratched the surface. I see that you are joining my oh happy Tuesday, Jeff. I see like my friends and family joining my live stream. I really appreciate you being here. But uh, last Tuesday, we talked about iOS development and interview questions, but we barely scratched the surface. We barely scratched the surface. Um, and today we're going to continue. And you know what? Before we continue, let me just do really quick retweet my tweet about that I am hosting live right now, so more people can actually go ahead and join our live stream tonight. Um, Streaming right now, right now. A little bit of a housekeeping tonight. We are going to cover the rest of interview questions for iOS developers, and we have a lot of questions to cover. So the reason I decided to do iOS development, iOS interview questions and answers, because it seems like the market is really good. My LinkedIn is literally blowing up. Um, I do have a job and I'm happy with my job, but I know it might be tempting for some of you, or some of you are looking for a job, and now it would be a good time to land that job opportunity. But you gotta go through interview questions. You gotta go through interview process. So today we're going to go through interview iOS questions part 2, and we're gonna talk about accessibility. We're gonna talk about data and data flow. We also gonna talk about iOS. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let's get started with accessibility. So um, before we get started, though, accessibility is a very important aspect of iOS development, and not very often, but like often enough, companies do ask questions about accessibility. And uh, normally, if it's not accessibility engineer or accessibility dedicated iOS engineer, normally they are not as difficult, and normally they're not as deep. As long as you know foundation of accessibility, as long as you are aware how to work with accessibility, you're going to be fine. But again, it depends on the role. If that company puts a lot of effort and resources into accessibility, you definitely should be more prepared. So let's get started. How much experience do you have testing with voiceover? So first of all, what is voiceover? Voiceover is a tool for users who are not able to see the screen. So what that tool does, it reads the screen from top down, and you can actually configure it how to read it. So if you've never experienced or if you've never played around with voiceover, I highly recommend you to try it out and play with voiceover on your device. So the way to do it, you go to accessibility, you go to right here with voiceover, and uh, from that you can configure your voice over. So when you're developing, it's really important to test your application for voiceover. Many things, many built-in functions in iOS come with accessibility. For example, buttons, like the labels for the buttons, they will be red. Uh, Title, like labels, they will be red, as well as like static text and things like that. But sometimes you need to enable your accessibility and test it out with voiceover. Moreover, if certain things are not accessible for voice, or there might, there might be issues where user is not able to use your app in voice over mode. I had that issue with one of the application when we had like a drawer going up and down on the map. So because that button on the drawer wasn't accessible with voiceover, user wasn't able to really grab that element and swipe up and down, or like tap on the button so it will swipe up and down. So it is really important to test your application with voiceover and make sure that your application is accessible with voiceover. How would you explain dynamic type to a new iOS developer? Oh, and I don't have yeah, how much how would you explain dynamic type to a new iOS developer? So a dynamic type is a type of um, is a iOS accessibility feature. Basically allows user to modify the font on the phone. It can be really small font, it can be large, it can be large font. So whenever you implement your phones uh, um, or your labels and whatever text you might have in your app, you can implement dynamic type. It can require a little bit extra work, but it is possible to make it accessible, and uh, when user selects large font for your text, so your application will look accordingly. So basically, dynamic type will change the font size of your text in your app, including labels and buttons, um, as um, um, as an accessibility feature. So, what accommodations have you added to apps to make them more accessible? Accessibility is a big topic, and it's a I think it's a huge issue with many apps. So a good standard is to provide all accessibility features, including voiceover, motion control, and dynamic type, because you don't know what kind of user are going to use your mobile app. Maybe users with with a disability such as cerebral palsy, or users who have trouble controlling their body, they might need a motion control for your app so they can slow it down. Some people might need inverted colors, some people might need voiceover. But as a bare minimum, or if your app is not 100% accessible, or if you're just starting working with accessibility, I think a good place to start with accessibility would be add voiceover support, and then start with dynamic type as much as you can. You can add other features later, but voiceover and dynamic type, that would be one of the requirements. That would be absolutely bare minimum for your app to be more to make it more accessible. On top of that, when we talk about accessibility, it's not just about voiceover, and it's not just about dynamic type, and it's not just about motion control. It's also about the language. Use the language that everybody can understand. Use the language that is accessible for everyone. For example, some of the deaf people might have trouble understanding certain English sentences. Um, so you might want to, you don't have to simplify your language necessarily, but you can use, um, if you don't have to use super sophisticated, super complex, and convoluted language in your mobile app, you probably shouldn't use it, because not only people with, like, for like, as a deaf community is one example, not everybody understands English like as people from hearing community in deaf community, because deaf community, a lot of deaf people use sign language as their first language, and sign language is different from English. So that's where it might be a little bit complicated for deaf community understanding certain concepts in your mobile app. But also you have to consider that a lot of people who came to America, or not maybe who came to America, who use your mobile app, and your mobile app is in English, for example, they might not be native speakers, and certain language may not be accessible to them. So another thing to think about, accessible language for everyone. So now let's talk about data. So how is a dictionary different from an array? And again, how dictionary different from an array? So here we have an example of an array, and we have an example of a dictionary. So the main difference between array between and dictionary is how you access data. So if you look at the array, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, each element in this array, 1 is under index 0, 2 is under index 1, 3 is under index 2, 4 is under index 3. So for example, if I want to access the third element in the array, so it would be 0, 1, 2, 3. So the index 3, it would be 4. So if I want to access the very first element in the array, it would be index 0. This is how we access data in the array. How we a dictionary is a different data type. A dictionary is a key value pair. For example, here we have first as a key, and the value is 1. Second as a key, and the value is 2. And the third as a key, and the value is 3. If I want to access value 1, I would have to specify the key first. So this is the main difference. How to differentiate array from dictionary is how you access data. What is the main difference between classes and structs in Swift? There are quite a few of them. Classes are reference type, and struct is a value type. Classes can use inheritance, and structs cannot. Classes have didn't, and structs do not. So the main difference, inheritance, classes are reference type, and structs are value type. Didn't, like, you can didn't the class, you can didn't the struct, a struct. What is the difference between float double and CGFloat data types. So um, it's a question about how many bits. So a float is always 32-bit. A double is 64-bit, and CGFloat is either 32-bit or 64-bit, depending on the device it runs on. But realistically, it's just a 64-bit all the time. The bonus for this answer would be that in Swift 5.5 and onwards allows us to use CGFloat and Double interchangeably. What is the difference between map and compact map? Sometimes, before asking that question, I use what is the higher order, what kind of higher order functions or higher order methods do you know? So map and compact map, they're both higher order functions and both transform an array. The only difference that compact map unwraps optionals. For example, when you want to transform strings into int or in array, it might have optionals, it might have nil, so it will unwrap it safely. In other words, in both, it won't return nil. So, what are one-sided ranges and when would you use them? So, let's talk about one-sided ranges. So, a one-sided range in Swift is when for example, you need to access a part of the array and you don't necessarily have to, like, you don't necessarily care um, about either the beginning of the array or the end of the array. So if you want to access an array at the beginning, so you don't care what is the first index, but you want to access up to certain index, so you would specify it like that. So I want to see what is up to the second index, and in our array it is Swift, Python, and C#, which are programming languages. If you another example of one-sided array is when you want to access an array from certain index, starting from certain index. For example, you want to start from index 2, so it would be C#, JavaScript, and Kotlin. So this is one-sided array. In this instance, a system will automatically determine the end of the array or the beginning of the array. To be honest with you, I'm never being asked that question on the interview. It's one of the questions. And by the way, I think it's a good segue to give credit when credit is due. I found those questions on Paul Hadson's website, and I will send you a link to his website where he has all the questions that I use for this presentation. Ironically enough, or not ironically enough, I come up with a very similar questions, or I usually come up with a very similar questions when I interview iOS developers. So many Paul Hadson's questions, they just sometimes word it a little bit better, or he would put questions that I just didn't think about, but majority of them is what we ask, whether or not we use that resource. So, and thank you, Paul, for providing that information. Like I said, I will post the link in the description. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, it's the best way to keep up with my live streams. Like, YouTube will notify you if you have not subscribed. Please do the YouTube thing. Like, share, and subscribe. And when you share, people might have access to the information about software development, and maybe one of your friends might be interested that you don't even know about. So please do the YouTube thing. All right, what is the difference between a value type and a reference type? It's a very common interview question. So, and let's look at the answer. So in Swift, structs, enums, or enumerations, tuples are all value types, and while classes and closures are reference types. In a nutshell, a value type contains data, and a reference type contains the location in memory when that data lives. In practice, this means that when a value type is assigned to a variable or passed as a parameter to a function, it is copied, creating a new and unique instance of that data. So say we make a point struct. So when we assign it to a new point, we create a new point. And to illustrate it a little bit better, this is the example how we pass by reference type and when we pass by value type. I think it's a great example. I think it's a great example to see. So like the cup when it passed by reference type, both cups are filled, and when it passed by value type, we create a brand new cup. And when we fill the cup, we fill that brand new cup, and the initial cap, the initial struct, or a value type won't be affected. What is a type? What is a type erasure, and when would you use it? So, Paul Hudson put together excellent explanation. I had exactly the same explanation for this question. Basically, a type erasure is a functionality, is a feature of a Swift programming language when you can erase type, so you don't have to have conflicting types in your code. Perfect example is um, in combine. So for example, um, any publisher is a kind of generic type of a publisher. For example, when you operate and you pass your publisher in the function, you might use, for example, future, but you want to return any publisher to eliminate the conflicts, the type conflicts in your code. And also you can say some type. Some type, you might assign a type to that generic, but you can erase a type so you won't have conflicts in the type. We see it in SwiftUI as well, like with somebody. So like when you see in the SwiftUI like somebody, so like that also can be as a type erasure. But like the most valuable example that I can think of is in combine, when we use publishers and we erase to any publisher. So there's a command, there's a function to say erase to any publisher, and this is where the type erasure happens. iOS. And by the way, before we continue, if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, please let me know. I'm not just talking at you in this live stream. I would like to interact with you. So if you have questions, thoughts, please feel free to ask me in the chat. So I would really appreciate that. And I'm streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and Twitter. So whenever you're at, do the YouTube things, like go back to my YouTube and subscribe to my channel. But I'm not kidding. But also on your platform, please like the video, please share the video, so you never know who might be interested in that kind of content. So let's talk about iOS. How do you create your UI layouts, storyboards, or in code? So it's really up to you. There. So before Swift UI, it's either in storyboards or in code or a hybrid. Now we have Swift UI. You can say, you know what? I don't use storyboards. I don't use UI in code. I do SwiftUI if you work with strictly with SwiftUI. But um, the way I would answer this question, I prefer to build my UI in code because I feel like I have more control over it, and um, it's I will avoid merge conflicts. So sometimes we do have merge conflicts because of the storyboards. And with code review, when we submit an MR or PR that's strictly related to the UI, it's very easy to see what developer has done, because when developer just submits a storyboard and that's it, it's kind of hard to see what's going on unless you can run the application and see that. If you're a fan of the storyboard, you can also provide your reasonings why you use storyboards. What are so good about storyboards? One example, why would I use storyboards, or why what like a team would use storyboards, is the amount of code that you have to write. So with storyboards, your code shrinks dramatically, so you don't have to really write a lot of UI code. You can you can do all the layout in the storyboard, and in your code you can just provide the logic. So it's a benefits of the storyboard. So how do you use auto layout? And this question is my favorite because auto layout is great, and I there are really many ways to use it. So one example is to group your UI by stacks. So by horizontal stack or by vertical stack, and stack your UI together. And for that main stack, provide the constraints for like top, trailing, and leading, and bottom anchor. And uh, with that, you don't have to manage a lot of constraints. Stacks are great, and they're pretty easy to manage. Another technique can be used providing anchors to your views. So uh, uh, they views. Oh, I have a typo here. The views, not they views. The views can use top, bottom, leading, and trailing anchor. So they or they can use anchors to other views, or use other views anchors as well. And bonus, when we talk about anchors, when you talk about anchors, it is recommended to use leading and trailing anchors versus right and left. Uh, because so that we can provide support for different writing systems. For example, Hebrew and Arabic are written from left to right, so their leading and their trailing will switch. So you can specify left and right, but for accessibility purposes and to support other languages, it is recommended to use leading and trailing anchors. How would you add a shadow to one of your views? So in UIkit, all view layers have options for shadow, such as opacity, radius, offset, color, and a path. In SwiftUI, you can specify those too, but you can just use shadow, view modifier shadow. But it's for basic shadow in Swift UI. It can be definitely more complex. You can create a shape and create a shadow, and you can create opacity, and you create different color, and you create different offsets. So you can go as crazy as you want with shadows of Swift UI. But if you want just a basic shadow, a shadow modifier would do it. How do you round the corners on one of the views? So if you are using UIkit, you would use corner radius. property of your view layer. For example, my view layer, corner radius 10. In SwiftUI, you can use corner radius. What are the advantages and disadvantages of SwiftUI compared to UIkit? So, it kind of reminds me of a joke, running joke in the iOS community. Is SwiftUI ready for production? If you've been to a Clubhouse app in early days when like all iOS developers actively participated, there, I don't know if there are, they might be. I don't anymore. I do have the app. I don't participate really actively, but like every single room for iOS developers would be a discussion: is SwiftUI ready for production? So, but all jokes aside, the advantages of SwiftUI, and again, it's my opinion, so you can play around with SwiftUI and come up with UI ideas. And the problem with SwiftUI is that certain apps may have to support older version than iOS 13. So another disadvantage of Swift UI. I start with disadvantages. So I started with disadvantages. Another disadvantage of Swift UI is that it is a new framework. It's changing. It's not changing absolutely crazy and uncontrollably. Apple goes really slowly on improving that framework, which I approve, and I think it's the right pace that they're going with. But it's a new framework, and for certain components that come easily out of the box for UIkit, you would have to work a little bit harder. In Swift UI, it is improving, and um, I think to take the full advantage of Swift UI, you have to use latest and greatest. Um, you have to support latest and greatest OS system or iOS system. But if you have to support, for example, iOS 13, there's still quite a bit of work to make it work together. What is advantages of Swift UI? It is really easy to build UI. It is really easy to build UI. It is fun. It is declarative, and um, it's a less of a headache. Like when you deal with UI, and I think one of the advantages for me that I don't have to think about constraints anymore. So I think it's great. So, and it's another advantage of Swift UI. When I think about like a company and like kind of like make a code base more attractive for other developers, that it will attract more developers because a lot of iOS developers are into Swift UI and would like to work with Swift UI. So, if you want to attract more fresh and passionate talent, Swift UI will do it. So like if somebody approaches me and say, hey, like we have Swift UI, would you like to work with us? Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think of a sensible minimum iOS development target? So there are different iOS development target: iOS 13, iOS 12, iOS 10, iOS 6, iOS whatever 3, iOS 15. So, and it's more like the way you answer this question will tell me a lot about your seniority as an iOS developer. Um, the way I approach this is through analytics. So I would like to see my demo. Like if I'm building a brand new app, if I'm building absolutely brand new app and that app has no audience as of yet, yes, I will build with the latest and greatest OS systems so I can take advantage of the latest and greatest API, of the latest and greatest achievements that Apple did. If I am using a legacy app, normally a legacy app will provide some sort of statistic or analytics, the percentage of the users that have like certain minimum OS version, and also uh, for example, like 5% of user on iOS 12. If you have really large audience, like billions of people, it's going to be a lot of people, and especially if your app brings a lot of revenue, a lot of money to your business, you might want to think twice about getting rid of that portion of population. But if your audience is fairly small or not as large, so 5% is not going to be as noticeable for you. The answer, it will depends on the analytics. It will depends also like if it is a new app or existing app, and it will depends on the audience that you're targeting. So if you're targeting like older audience or older audience, they probably have tendency to keep older iOS version a little bit longer. But the good news when you starting with a brand new application is that iOS users, iOS fans, they update their iOS system fairly frequently. What kind of settings would you store in info plist file? So the info plist file stores settings that must be available when the app is running. So you could talk about URLs. You can store different URLs in your plist, privacy, permission messages, custom fonts, whether the app disables background running, and so on. For bonus point, you can consider question: would you use info plist to store custom setting in your app, such as API endpoints and um, a- API endpoints is actually really solid answer, because I work on one of the code bases where we store our API endpoints in InfoPillis, and phone numbers. Phone numbers is another thing that you can store in InfoPillis file easily. So, what is the purpose of size classes? Size classes let you add extra layout configuration to your app so that your UI works well across different devices. For example, you might say that a stack view aligns its view horizontally in normal conditions, but vertically when constrained, when there is a smaller screen. Like the bonus point would be to mention how important it is when working with split view or side by side view. So, what happens when a color or UI color has values outside of 1 to 0? So, in older devices, it wouldn't matter. So, in newer devices, it would be more expressive side for so the rep value, for example, the rep value beyond 1.1 is will be more vividly red, going to like P3 display. So basically, the more, if it goes beyond 1.0, your red color will be more intensified. And this is all the questions that I had for tonight. Let me know if you have any questions. If you haven't already, do the YouTube things. It helps my channel. It helps the YouTube algorithms, and it helps other people to discover my channel and learn more about iOS development. And definitely let me know if you have any questions. And maybe like before we go, let me know what kind of questions you've been asked during interview questions as an iOS developer. Um, like, was it like, were they similar or were they different? What was new for you in this live stream? What maybe there are some things that you already knew. And like I said, majority of the questions for this presentation I took from Paul Hudson website. And like I mentioned earlier in my live stream, uh, um, like I mentioned early in my live stream, that's not really Paul Hudson's questions when we think about it, because when I and my team sit together and like thought about iOS questions, we come up with the similar questions because we all work on the similar applications. Uh, got all my note written down. Thank you. So, we were writing for 41 minutes, and unless we have last minute questions or last minute thoughts, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for writing with me. I will see you in the next video or in the next iOS Tuesday. And I really enjoy your company tonight. I really miss you guys. Thank you and have a good day, good night. Bye. And somebody's calling me with that caller ID. Bye, y'all.